My husband faked a business trip to have an affair with his high school ex. I confronted him at the hotel, and now I'm exposing his dark secret to everyone he knows. My name is Lisa, 34F, and I've been married to Tom, 35M, for 8 years. We've had our ups and downs, but I always thought we were solid. Last week, he told me he had a business trip coming up, one that required him to be out of town for an entire week. It wasn't unusual for his job to take him places, so I didn't question it. He packed his bags, gave me a kiss goodbye, and off he went. I thought everything was normal until I found a strange receipt in our bedroom after he left. The receipt wasn't from a hotel or an airport. It was from a small cafe in a town 2 hours away. Something didn't add up. At first I brushed it off, convincing myself that he might have stopped there on the way to the airport. But a nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't let me rest, so I decided to dig a little deeper. I checked his calendar, his emails, anything I could find. That's when I noticed something strange. There were no business meetings scheduled for the week he claimed to be away. My heart raced as I realized he had lied to me. I knew then that this was no ordinary business trip. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something much darker, something I needed to uncover. I spent hours piecing together what little information I had, but it wasn't enough. I needed more answers, so I did something I never thought I would. I tracked his phone. The guilt gnawed at me, but I was desperate for the truth. I watched as his location popped up on the map, and my heart sank. He wasn't hundreds of miles away on business trip. He was 2 hours away in the same town where his high school girlfriend, Claire, 34F, had moved back a few months ago. Suddenly, everything fell into place. He had lied to me, and I knew exactly why. Rage filled me as I sat there, staring at his location on my screen. I felt like a fool, like my entire marriage had been a sham. The betrayal cut deep, and I knew I couldn't sit by and do nothing. I needed to confront him, to make him face the consequences of his lies. So I packed a bag, got in the car, and drove to that town, my mind racing the entire way. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I needed to see him, to catch him in the act. I was done being his trusting, oblivious wife. When I arrived, I parked outside the small hotel where his phone had last pinged. I waited, my hands shaking as I watched the entrance. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw him. He was walking out with Claire by his side, laughing, holding hands like they were teenagers again. My heart shattered as I watched them, but I refused to let the tears fall. Instead, I got out of the car and marched toward them, my rage boiling over. He looked up, his face paling as he saw me. He tried to let go of her hand, but it was too late. The damage was done. "Really, Tom?" I spat, crossing my arms as I glared at him. "A business trip?" "You're a pathetic liar," he stammered, clearly at a loss for words, while Claire just looked at me with wide eyes, her face quickly turning red. I could see the guilt in his eyes, but he tried to play it off. "Lisa, this isn't what it looks like. We're just catching up." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "Catching up? You're holding hands and checking into a hotel together, Tom. Do you think I'm stupid?" He had no response, and I could see the panic start to set in. I turned my attention to Claire, who was now looking anywhere but at me. "Did you know he was married? Did you know he was lying to me?" She mumbled something about not wanting to get in the middle, but I didn't buy it. "You're already in the middle," I snapped. "You're in the middle of my marriage, the life I built with him, and you think you can just play house with my husband like it's some kind of reunion." She looked ashamed, but I couldn't find any sympathy for her. She was as much a part of this betrayal as he was. Tom reached out, trying to touch my arm, but I recoiled. "Don't," I hissed, pulling away. "You don't get to play the victim here. You lied to me. You've been lying to me for God knows how long." He stammered, trying to explain, but I was done listening. "Say it, Tom. I've heard enough of your lies. I'm filing for divorce." His face crumpled, and I could see the fear in his eyes. He hadn't expected this. He thought I'd forgive him, that I'd look the other way. But I was done being his fool. I was done letting him manipulate me. He tried to argue, tried to tell me that nothing had happened, that it was all innocent. I laughed, the sound bitter and hollow. "Innocent? You faked an entire business trip to spend a week with her. How is that innocent?" He looked down, unable to meet my eyes. I could see the shame in his posture, but it didn't make me feel any better. He'd made his choice, and now he had to live with the consequences. I turned and walked away, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I was stronger than that. I wasn't going to let him break me. As I drove home, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. I had just ended my marriage, the life I had spent years building with him. The tears finally started to fall, and I let them. I had been betrayed, humiliated, but I wasn't going to let this define me. I was going to rebuild my life, to find happiness on my own terms. I didn't need him, and I didn't need his lies. I was done being his doormat, his convenient little wife. I was going to take control of my life, no matter how painful it was. When I got home, I packed his things, throwing everything he owned into bags and leaving them by the front door. I wanted every trace of him out of my life, every reminder of the lies he had told. I spent hours scrubbing the house, trying to erase the memories of him, of us. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to move on, to rebuild my life without him. I wasn't going to let him hold me back, to keep me trapped in a marriage that was built on lies. I deserved better, and I was going to find it. The next day, Tom showed up at the house, pleading with me to talk to him. He stood outside, knocking on the door, begging me to let him explain. I watched from the window, my heart aching as I listened to his pleas, but I knew better than to let him back in. I had seen the truth with my own eyes, and I wasn't going to let him twist it, to make me doubt myself. I stayed strong, refusing to open the door. Eventually he left, but I knew he'd be back. He wasn't the type to give up easily, and part of me dreaded his persistence. As the days passed, he continued to try and reach out, leaving messages, sending flowers, trying everything he could to win me back. He even had the audacity to show up at my work, pleading with me to give him a second chance. I felt a surge of anger every time I saw him, every time I heard his voice. He had betrayed me, lied to me, and now he wanted me to just forget about it, to move on like nothing had happened. But I wasn't that forgiving. I wasn't going to let him worm his way back into my life. I was stronger than he thought. One evening, he left a long voicemail telling me that he had made a mistake, that he was sorry, that he loved me. I listened, my heart aching, but I knew I couldn't believe him. He had lied too many times, had taken me for granted for too long. I was done playing his game, done letting him control me. I deleted the message, refusing to let his words sway me. I was stronger than that, stronger than he ever gave me credit for. I was going to move on, to rebuild my life, and I wasn't going to let him stop me. As I focused on rebuilding my life, I began to rediscover parts of myself that I had lost over the years. I threw myself into new hobbies, spending time with friends and finding joy in little things. I felt a sense of freedom, a sense of empowerment that I hadn't felt in years. I was no longer defined by my marriage, by my relationship with Tom. I was my own person, and I was determined to create a life that was filled with happiness, with love, with purpose. I was ready to move forward, to leave the past behind, and to embrace the future on my own terms. One day, I received a message from Claire. She wanted to meet, to talk, to clear the air. I hesitated, unsure if I wanted to face her, to hear her excuses. But I decided to go, to get the closure I needed. We met at a small cafe, and she looked nervous, her hands trembling as she spoke. She told me that she had no idea Tom was still married, that he had lied to her too. I listened, my heart aching, but I couldn't find it in myself to forgive her. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences, just like I did. As I listened to her excuses, I felt a strange sense of calm. I realized that I no longer cared about her, about Tom, about the lies they had told. I had moved on, had found a sense of peace that was entirely my own. I stood up, leaving her sitting there, and walked out of the cafe, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. I didn't need their apologies, didn't need their excuses. I was free to live my life on my own terms. I had found my strength, and I wasn't going to let them take it away from me. Over time, I began to notice changes in myself. I was stronger, more resilient, more determined than I had ever been. I had faced the worst kind of betrayal, and I had survived. I had come out the other side stronger, wiser, more aware of my own worth. I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. I was done letting others define my happiness, done letting others control my life. I was ready to embrace the future, to create a life that was filled with love, with laughter, with endless possibilities. I was free, and I wasn't looking back. As the months went by, I found myself thinking of Tom less and less. He had been an important chapter in my life, but I had turned the page, had moved on to a new story. I was creating a life that was entirely my own, filled with genuine connections, with people who truly cared about me. I had reclaimed my life, had found the sense of purpose that was entirely my own. I was free from the chains of the past, free to live my life on my own terms. I was ready for whatever the future held, no longer held down by the pain that had once defined me. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, I reflected on how far I had come. I was no longer the naive woman who had blindly trusted her husband, who had let others define her happiness. I had grown, had learned to trust myself, to believe in my own strength. I was free from the chains of the past, free to live my life on my own terms. I knew that there would still be challenges ahead, but I also knew that I was ready for them. I had survived, had risen above the darkness, and I was ready to embrace whatever the future held. Over time, I threw myself into new experiences, meeting people and exploring passions I had long neglected. I took up painting, joined a book club, and even signed up for a hiking group. I was rediscovering myself, building a life that was filled with joy and freedom. I was no longer defined by my marriage, by the betrayal that had once consumed me. I was living life on my own terms, creating a future that was entirely my own. I found myself surrounded by people who valued me, who saw me for who I truly was. I was stronger, wiser, and I was done looking back. Then, one day, out of the blue, Tom showed up at my door. He looked tired, defeated, like a man who had lost everything. He begged me to talk to him, to let him explain, to give him another chance. But I was done listening to his excuses, done letting him twist the truth. "It's over, Tom," I said, my voice steady, calm. "You made your choice, and now you have to live with it." He pleaded, telling me that he had changed, that he had made a mistake, but I didn't waver. I had moved on, had built a life that was better without him. I was done with his lies. He asked if we could at least be friends, if we could find some way to stay in each other's lives. I laughed, shaking my head. "Friends? After what you did? I don't think so, Tom. You broke my trust, shattered my heart, and now you want to pretend like nothing happened." He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I could see the regret in his eyes, but it didn't make a difference. He had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. I wasn't going to let him back into my life, not after everything he had done to me. After you left, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I had finally closed that chapter, had finally put the past behind me. I knew that he would always be a part of my story, but he no longer held any power over me. I had reclaimed my life, had taken control of my future. I was free, free from the pain, free from the lies, free to live life on my own terms. I was stronger than I had ever been, more resilient, more determined to create a future that was filled with love, with happiness, with genuine connections. I was ready for whatever came next. In the months that followed, I continued to focus on myself, on building a life that was entirely my own. I found joy in the small things and the quiet moments of peace that came with being alone. I had learned to love my own company, to find happiness within myself. I didn't need a partner to complete me, didn't need someone else to make me feel whole. I was enough just as I was. I was free from the expectations, the demands, the constant need to please others. I was living life on my own terms, and I was happier than I had ever been. I had finally found my peace. One day, I ran into Claire at a local market. She looked different, worn down, tired, like someone who had been through hell and back. She approached me, hesitating before speaking. "I'm sorry, Lisa, for everything. I didn't realize how much damage I had caused." I looked at her, feeling a strange mixture of pity and indifference. I knew I could forgive her, could let go of the anger, but I didn't owe her anything. "I've moved on, Claire," I said simply. "I hope you can do the same." She nodded, looking relieved, and walked away. I watched her go, feeling a sense of closure, a sense of peace. After that encounter, I realized just how far I had come. I was no longer haunted by the past, no longer defined by the pain that had once consumed me. I had built a life that was filled with happiness, with love, with genuine connections. I was surrounded by people who valued me, who saw my worth, and I knew I was better for it. I had faced the darkness, had overcome the betrayal, and I had come out the other side stronger, wiser, more resilient. I was ready to embrace the future, to create a life that was entirely my own. I was finally free. Over time, I began dating again, cautiously opening myself up to new possibilities. I met people who valued me, who treated me with kindness and respect. I felt a sense of excitement, a sense of hope that I hadn't felt in years. I knew that I was stronger now, more aware of my own worth, and I wasn't going to settle for anything less than what I deserved. I was done with lies, done with manipulation, done with the pain that had once held me captive. I was ready to move forward, to create a future that was filled with love, with happiness, with endless possibilities. Then, one day, I received a letter from Tom. It was a long, rambling apology, filled with regret, with sorrow, with promises to change. He begged me to take him back, to give him one more chance. I read it, feeling a pang of sadness, but I knew better than to believe his words. He had broken my trust, had shattered my heart, and I wasn't going to let him do it again. I burned the letter, watching the flames consume his empty promises. I was done with him, done with the lies, done with the pain. I was free, and I wasn't going to let him drag me back into the darkness. As the years went by, I continued to build a life that was filled with joy, with love, with genuine connections. I surrounded myself with people who truly cared about me, who valued me for who I was. I had reclaimed my life, had taken control of my future, and I was happier than I had ever been. I was free from the chains of the past, free to live my life on my own terms. I had survived the worst kind of betrayal, had risen above the darkness, and I was ready for whatever came next. I was finally at peace. One evening, as I sat with friends at a cozy cafe, I found myself laughing, genuinely happy. I realized how much had changed, how far I'd come. I no longer felt the weight of Tom's betrayal, no longer carried the scars of our failed marriage. I had healed, had rebuilt myself from the ground up. I was surrounded by people who uplifted me, who valued me, and I knew I was exactly where I needed to be. I had taken control of my life, had learned to trust myself again, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next. I was stronger, happier, and more at peace than I had ever been. As I walked home that night, I thought back to the woman I used to be, the woman who had trusted Tom, who had believed in him, who had given him everything. I didn't recognize her anymore. I had grown, had changed, had found a strength within myself that I never knew I had. I was no longer defined by the pain of the past, no longer haunted by the lies that had once consumed me. I was living life on my own terms, creating a future that was filled with love, with laughter, with endless possibilities. I was free, and I was ready for whatever came next. Then, one day, I received a message from a mutual friend. She mentioned that Tom had moved away, that he was starting over in a new city. I felt a strange sense of closure, knowing that he was finally out of my life for good. I didn't feel sadness or anger, just a quiet peace. He had been a part of my story, but I had moved on, had turned the page. I was creating a new story now, one that was filled with hope, with joy, with genuine connections. I was living life on my own terms, and I knew that the best was yet to come. Over time, I found myself reflecting less on the past and more on the future. I was excited for the possibilities, for the adventures that awaited me. I knew that I was strong enough to face anything that came my way, that I was resilient enough to overcome any challenge. I had survived the worst kind of betrayal, had risen above the pain, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next. I was surrounded by love, by laughter, by genuine connections that filled my life with joy. I had reclaimed my life, had taken control of my future, and I was finally at peace. I was free. One day, as I walked through a park, I watched couples holding hands, families laughing, people enjoying life. I felt a sense of gratitude, a sense of joy that was entirely my own. I didn't need anyone else to complete me. I was whole, just as I was. I had built a life that was filled with happiness, with love, with genuine connections. I had faced the darkness, had overcome the pain, and I was stronger for it. I was living life on my own terms, creating a future that was filled with hope, with endless possibilities. I was finally free, finally at peace, and I was ready for whatever came next. Then, one evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the stars, I thought back to the journey that had brought me here. I had been through hell and back, had faced betrayal, heartbreak, and loss. But I had survived, had come out the other side stronger, wiser, and more resilient. I knew that I was capable of facing anything, that I was ready for whatever the future held. I didn't need validation from anyone else. I was enough just as I was. I was living life on my own terms, creating a future that was filled with love, with joy, with endless possibilities. I was free, and I wasn't looking back. As the years went by, I continued to build a life that was filled with happiness, with laughter, with genuine connections. I surrounded myself with people who truly cared about me, who valued me for who I was. I knew that I was stronger now, more resilient, more determined to create a future that was entirely my own. I had faced the darkness, had overcome the pain, and I was ready for whatever came next. I was free from the chains of the past, free to live my life on my own terms. I had reclaimed my life, had taken control of my future, and I was finally at peace. Looking back, I realized that I had found happiness on my own, had built a life that was filled with hope and possibility. I was no longer defined by the mistakes of the past, no longer haunted by the pain that had once consumed me. I had found a sense of peace, a sense of joy that was entirely my own. I was free to live my life on my own terms, free to create a future that was filled with love, with happiness, with endless possibilities. I was finally at peace, finally whole, and I knew that the best was yet to come. I was ready for whatever life had in store. One afternoon, I received a message from an old friend who had heard about my journey. She told me that she admired my strength, my resilience, my ability to overcome the pain and rebuild my life. I felt a surge of gratitude, a sense of pride in how far I had come. I knew that I was capable of facing anything, that I was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. I was no longer defined by my past, by the mistakes of others. I had reclaimed my life, had found a sense of peace, and I was ready to embrace the future on my own terms. As I walked through the city that day, I felt a sense of freedom, a sense of possibility that filled me with joy. I was no longer haunted by the pain of the past, no longer defined by the lies that had once held me captive. I had built a life that was filled with love, with laughter, with genuine connections. I was surrounded by people who valued me, who uplifted me, and I knew that I was exactly where I needed to be. I was living life on my own terms, embracing the future with open arms, and I was finally at peace. I was free, and I wasn't looking back.